I want us to look at something, as I said, we're familiar with. I want us to look at the subject of natural law and legal law. Or if I'm going to put it another way, I'm going to look at the subject of the letter versus the spirit. Now, I know most of us understand this, all right? But I want to make sure that all of us understand it. Now, the verse is on the board, is on the screen. I'd like us to look at it. And I'm not going to put any of you on the spot just yet, but I want us to read the verse together first. In fact, Brother Emerald, could you please read the verse for us in a strong voice? And I think can all of us do the verse? Yes. All right, go ahead for me, Brother Emerald.
But now we are delivered from the law, that being dead, wherein we were held, that we should serve the newness of spirit, and not the oldness of the letter.
Thank you, Brother Emerald. All right, let me start with those first ideas. Now we are delivered. Sister Alma, what does delivered mean?
Delivered. That means we are born again.
All right, if you say, the Lord has delivered me from my enemies, what does that mean? Please, Sister Palmer.
I mean, I'm free.
You're free. You have been set free. Now, Paul says we are delivered or we are set free from what? No, according to the verse.
From the law.
From the law. He said we are delivered from the law. We are set free from the law. Now, this is why when we read the Bible, we have to be very careful to read exactly what we see. How does Paul mean we are set free from the law when all of us knows that the law is good? But it's what he says, so it's to understand what he means, right? Paul says, now we are set free from the law, and he explains why. Now the next part says, that being dead, wherein we were held. Sister Caroline. He explains how we are delivered from the law, right? We are clear about the first part. We are set free, Sister Palmer says, and the rest of us agree we are set free from the law, right? Now, how are we set free from the law? We are set free from the law because that is dead. That was holding us. Something was holding us. And as long as it was holding us, we were not free from the law. But now that it is, the thing that was holding us is dead, we are now free from the law. And Sister Caroline, it is not in the verse. But I'm going to ask a question anyway. What do you think it is that was holding us that is now dead? Not sin, not Sister Palmer though, Sister Caroline. Not sin, it's not sin. You want to pass it? All right, pass it. Brother Peter, what do you think?
I think it's the sinful nature.
The sinful nature, he says. All right. What do you say, Brother Bill?
Well, I'm thinking the same line of nature.
All right, very good. I agree with the both of you that it is the sinful nature or what is called the flesh, right? The flesh. Now let us prove it. To prove it, we have to go to another verse. Look at the verse that comes before. It says what? When we were in the flesh. So if you're a Christian, are you in the flesh? No, you were in the flesh. That is before you met Christ, right? When we were in the flesh, the motions of sin, which what? Were by the law. So, Brother Emer, when we were in the flesh, what is it that caused sin? I don't see that in the... Huh? Sister Herm? The law. Look here. Another did say, which were by the law. It's important that we understand what we are reading.
Maybe I think maybe you want to by the knowledge of the law, it is not so much the law itself create that condition, but the awareness.
All right, before we explain what he means, first of all, let us make sure we are hearing what he says. Because he says so. But we can look at what he means in a little bit. But first of all, look at what he says. Because I want us to analyze the verse and see if it's saying what we are trying to say. So we're not confusing ourselves. So I'm going to come back to what Brother Bill says in a moment. But just to help us realize, Paul says, when we were in the flesh, sin became active because of the law. The motions of sin were caused by the law. So that's why when he comes to the next verse, he says, but now we are delivered from the law. Why? Because the thing that was keeping us, the thing that the law was stirring up, is dead. What was it that was causing the sin again? The law and the flesh working together, right? As long as you are in the flesh, what does the law do? As long as you are in the flesh, what does the law do?
Condemn sin.
Don't say condemn. I agree, condemn sin, but that's not what the passage is saying. Thank you, Brother Bill. It stirs up sin. It stirs up sin. That's what we just read in the verse before. As long as you are in the flesh, the law stirs up sin. The motions of sin are created by the law. When does the law not stir up sin? When you are dead. All right? Where is the verse? Who shall I ask? Sister Jill. Can you remember where the verse is that says the law is made for a carnal man? It's not made for a righteous man? All right, we have to look at it because since it's not at your fingertips. It's 1 Timothy 1 and verse 9. We're going to put it on the board. Now here's where, let's start from verse 8 so we get the full impact of what he's saying. But we know that the law is good when, Brother Vincent? If it is used lawfully. So if it is not used in the lawful way, it is not good. All right, so even though we use the law, we have to use it the right way, otherwise it is not good. And what is the right way? The next verse. Knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous man. Is that what the Bible says? The Bible says the law is not made for a righteous man. Now, is the righteous man the man who is in the flesh or the man whose flesh is dead? The man whose flesh is dead. That's the righteous man. So the man whose flesh is dead, the law is not made for you. Is that what is that a reasonable conclusion? Yeah. The law is made for, it says, who? The lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and for sinners, for unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers, for whoremongers, for homosexuals, them that defile themselves with mankind, for men stealers, for liars, for perjured persons, and if there be any other thing that is contrary to sound doctrine. That is who the law is made for. If you are in that category, Brother Vin, if you're a thief, a murderer, a homosexual, a perjured person, the law is for you. It's made for you. Because you need it. Because your nature is so perverse, you need something to bring you under restriction. That's what the law is for. The person whose carnal nature is dead because he died with Christ, he has a different nature. So the law is not made for him. You make laws for those who have a tendency to be unruly. So, let's go back to that verse in Romans 7. Paul says, but now we are delivered from the law, because the thing is dead wherein we were held. And we say that that thing that held us is what again, Sister Jane? The thing that held us, that is now dead, we say that that thing is what? The flesh. Now here's the rest of the verse. So now that the flesh is dead and now that we are delivered from the law, that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. So something is new. All right? And something is old. The thing that is new, the new thing, the new way in which we serve is the way of the what? Spirit. And the old way in which we do not serve is the way of the... Right. Brother Vincent says the law. And he's right, but it needs explanation. Can you explain why you say the letter is the law, Brother Vincent?
The directives of lives, the dual laws. It's external, while the spirit is internal, from the heart.
All right. He's right, but it's not exactly the question I was asking. Let me illustrate what I'm trying to say on the board. Law. Okay? Now, a law, let me ask Brother Bill. What would you say is a law, Brother Bill?
Well, something that a government stated, some sort of principle to govern the behavior.
All right. Brother Peter, would you agree? Would anybody want to add anything to what Brother Bill said?
Something that is written.
Something that is written? Okay. Huh? A rule. Yeah. All right. All of that is right. But the answer that I get is a little too specific. It's not general enough. It doesn't cover every law. It only covers legal law. It only covers a legal law, right? The government make laws. God made laws and gave on Mount Sinai. But the definition you give me didn't cover a certain kind of law. And which law is that? The laws of nature. All right? The popular one is the law of gravity. The law of gravity causes everything to fall down. Okay? No matter what you do, Sister Palmer, it will never fall up. Anything drop, it drop down. Why doesn't it drop up? Because there is a law in nature that God put into the way things work, that everything must fall down. If you go out into space and you leave the earth, it doesn't work like that. If you throw something like this in space, it never comes back down. It keeps on going forever. It doesn't stop. It's only on earth that whatever goes up comes down. So, this is a law. We call it a law. Now, why do you call it a law? Why do they call it a law? It requires everything to behave the same way. So that's what a law is. A law is a rule that requires everything to behave a certain way. Now, you have legal laws that are made by the government. And they require you, when you come to a stop sign, you do what? You stop. And when you are driving in a 50 mile per hour zone, you do not go 60. They require you. So, a law is really a rule that requires a certain kind of behavior. Maybe I should write that down. A rule requiring a certain kind of behavior. I'm writing it here because I want to keep it before our minds. All right. Now, as far as law is concerned, in the realm of religion, as far as law is concerned, you have two kinds of law. Maybe I shouldn't say two kinds. You have two aspects to the law. One is the letter and the other is what? Now, let me clarify this a little. When I say the law here, I mean God's moral law. God's moral law. It has two aspects to it. You have the letter and you have the spirit. Now what Brother Vincent was explaining was the letter. The letter is what is written. Okay? It's carved, God carved it on stone. And if you look at the broader law, which is all the ceremonial laws, it's 613 of them that was given at Mount Sinai. It is written and it is called the letter. Now, when Paul says, but now we are delivered from the law, does he mean we are delivered from God's moral law? He means what? We are delivered from the letter of the moral law so that we can serve in what? Newness of spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. So the moral law still stands, but not the letter.
What the letter means?
It's the spirit that stands. The letter is for the carnal person.
What the letter means?
Well, as Brother Vincent was explaining, the letter is what is written.
Alright, but it's the same law.
Yes, but it is a letter.
Right, you know what I'm saying? The law of the spirit is different from the law.
Or the spirit of the law.
The spirit of the law is different from the letter of the law?
Yes.
Alright. So, you're saying the letter comes from the same moral law.
Yes.
And the spirit of the law comes from the same moral law.
It's based on the same moral law.
Everything based on the same moral law.
Yes, yes.
But it is how it is being somewhat, dished out.
Yes, exactly.
Alright, so in what way the letter somewhat dished out differently from the spirit then? Is because what is written and what is not written?
Well, that is a very good difference. But to explain why that makes it so different, I'm going to go to something else, right? All right, go to Romans chapter 2 now. And it's on the board. You don't have to go there if you don't want to. It's on the board. But the reference is Romans 2, 27 down to and 29. Now, here is what we mean when we talk about letter and spirit, because that's basically what Brother Bill is asking about. Let's go to verse 29 first. In fact, it's 27 to 29, but I'm going to start with 29. Here's what it says. Let me start with 28. For he is not a Jew which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh. So the first thing we notice here is that the true Jew is not the one who has Jewish blood and the one whose male organ has been circumcised. That is not the true Jew. That one is a Jew where? Outwardly. The one who has it in the flesh is an outward Jew. Alright? And Paul says that is not the true Jew. See the words he uses now. But he is a Jew which is one what? Inwardly. And circumcision is that what? Of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter. Not in the letter. Whose praise is not of men but of God. Now, based on this verse, Brother Bill, explain for us what is the difference between the letter and the spirit, based on this verse. What's the difference between a letter Jew and a spirit Jew?
Well, what is by works, really? Who practice the law by works and believe that by doing it, he will satisfy God's command. He's satisfying God and become righteous.
And the other?
And the other is by faith, believing in God, make him righteous by believing.
All right. So the difference between both Jews is that one has an outward look. The other one, you don't see anything outwardly, but his heart is right. One is based on what is outside and one is based on what is inside. That's the difference between the letter and the spirit. Now apply that to the moral law. One is based upon outward conformity to the set of rules. The other one is based upon a what? A changed heart. A changed heart. The letter has to do with what is outside. The spirit has to do with the inward change. That's the difference between letter and spirit. Now, the letter the person who is an observer of the moral law in the letter, where is he today? Well, some of them are in Israel, but many of them are in church. Okay. In the flesh, many of them are just going through what the rule says. But the heart has no real affection towards God. The heart is not in a resting relationship with God. Are they keeping Sabbath? No, they are observing a day. They are doing what the law requires in the letter, but the spirit is not there. They don't break anybody's house and steal things, but in their heart there is covetousness. Are they really keeping the law? Only the letter. They are not serving God in spirit. Now, this is why it's a very technical question, but people always ask me, do I keep the law? And usually I have a hard time to say I keep the law. Because keeping the law suggests that you are looking to the law and obeying the law. That's not how the Spirit works. That's how the letter works. In the letter, you obey because the rule says so. But I emerge in the Spirit, why do you do what is right?
Because that is coming from within.
Thank you. It's because your heart desires to do this. If somebody told me that if the Ten Commandments never say, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy, they wouldn't keep Sabbath. Now, does that person really keep the Sabbath in the spirit of it? I want to keep the Sabbath, whether the law says so or not, because God blessed the day from the beginning. And if God put aside a time for me and him, why do I need a rule to force me to do it? If somebody you love, Sister Doreen, somebody you love says, listen, sweetheart. That can be only one person here, right? Listen, sweetheart. I would like us to set aside Wednesday nights that we're going to spend some time just being with each other. Would you need for him to say, anyhow you don't come? His worries. Not if you love the person. If he has to say, anyhow you don't come, his words, you're going to go with a long face. That is not love. That is not the way the Sabbath was intended to be kept, because somebody compel you and say, if you don't, you are going to hell. No. That's the Sabbath of the letter. That is made for carnal people. It is not the way of the spirit of the law to say, thou shalt not kill. In the spirit of the law, God has put his nature inside of you. So you love your enemies. So why would you want to kill the person you love? So you don't need a rule that says thou shalt not kill, because your heart is completely against killing. So you don't need the rule. Now, who needs the rule? Who needs the letter? It is the person who is in the flesh, or who is what? Carnal. Right? He needs a rule that says don't kill. Why? Because in his heart he wants to kill the person. So you have to put a restriction on his behavior. You have to tell him, keep the Sabbath, because in his heart he doesn't really want to do it. Okay? It's not about fellowship with God for him. It's about observing a rule. So Paul says, when you try to serve in this way, the law stirs up sin in you. We're coming back to that, Brother Bill. Don't think I'm leaving it. The law stirs up sin in you, right? But he says, now that this is dead, we are delivered from the law, and he means we are delivered from what? The sin nature of the flesh, yes. But when he says we are delivered from the law, what does he mean? We are delivered from the letter of the law. It's the letter he's talking about. Does he mean God's moral law? No, he means the letter part of the law, right? Are we delivered from the spirit? No. No. So when Paul says now we are delivered from the law, we have to understand that when he talks about the law, most of the time he's focusing on the letter of the law. Right? So once you understand that the passage makes sense, he's saying that the letter of the law kept us bound to sin. And I'm going to explain why now. Since Brother Bill asked that question and I promised to come back to it, I'm going to explain how once you are in the flesh, the motions of sin. The motions of sin. The law stirs up the motions of sin. And I'm going to show you. I'm going to explain it to you and hope you can understand what I'm trying to say. But I think we are on a roll this morning, so I think we'll be able to do that. Let's go back to that verse in Romans 7 and verse 5. Again, it says, for when we were in the flesh, Christians, that's in the past tense, right? We were in the flesh. That's not you anymore. The motions of sin, which were by the law. So we're talking about the motions of sin or the actions of sin, okay? As a matter of fact, it's not just this verse. If you go down a little lower, you'll see it. Look what it says. Verse 8. But sin taking occasion by the commandment, wrought in me all manner of concupiscence, for without the law, sin was dead. For I was alive without the law once, but when the commandment came, sin revived, sin came to life, and I died. So when you look at this, you can see Paul clearly saying that the commandments, what do they do to him? They revive sin, they bring sin to life in him. Now, is he talking about himself as a Christian? He's talking about himself as a what? As a carnal person, right? He's referring to the experience he had when he was a carnal man. He's saying when you're a carnal person and you discover the law, what happens is that the law stirs up sin inside of you. Now, the first thing and the most important thing to ask yourself in this passage is this simple but profound question. What is sin? All right. How many people are familiar with the chapter? Put up your hand if you're familiar with the chapter. Brother Peter, Brother Vincent, Brother Emerit, Sister Joan. All right, since Sister Joan is here, I'm going to pick on her because she didn't get any questions yet. I don't want Sister Howard any either. I'm going to save Sister Howard for next. But Sister Joan, in this chapter, have you been following us so far? In this chapter, according to Paul, what is sin? You can't understand what he's saying unless you can answer that question.
The carnal nature.
All right. Good answer. She says that sin is the carnal nature. Sister Howard, normally, what is the popular definition of sin? The breaking of the law. That's the normal definition. This, I'm going to tell you, is the foundation of legalism. I'm telling you. Every day that I have discussions, I find that out more and more. But anyway, you have two ideas about sin. One is that sin is the carnal nature. One is that it is the breaking of the law. Now, why the passage is hard to understand is because you are thinking of definition number 2. How can it be that the law causes me to break the law? Because Paul says, sin taking occasion by the commandment brought up all manner of concupiscence. Without the law, sin was dead. And then he says, what did he say in verse 5? He says, the motions of sin which were by the law. He says that the law caused the motions, it caused the actions of sin. Okay? Now, Sister Joan says that in this passage, sin means the carnal nature. Go down to verse 21, and I'll show you where she's right. Verse 20. And I think verse 17 as well. Look at verse 17. Let's read 16 and 17. All right? If then I do that which I would not, I consent or I agree unto the law that it is good. Now then, it is no more I didn't start on the right place. Start from verse 15. For that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that do I not. But what I hate, that do I. So he has a problem, right? Sister Blossom, his problem is that He wants to go right and he finds himself going left, right? He doesn't want to smoke and he finds himself smoking. He doesn't want to curse and he finds himself cursing. Something is having the mastery over him. And in verse 16 he says, I consent unto the law that it is good. He agrees that it is good. That's why he wants to do it, right? But then he says, now then, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. So you have to understand, when he says sin, what is he talking about? Sister Carlene, when he says sin that dwelleth in me, can you put that in your own words? Sin that dwelleth in me.
Works of the flesh.
That's not wrong, but it's definitely not pointing in the direction that I want to go. Who wants to give it a try? Sister Doreen.
Sin is a carnal nature he's talking about.
It's a carnal nature. And to put it another way, it's a negative power. It's a negative power in the carnal person. Isn't it a power? Isn't it a ruling power? If something can take control of you and force you to do what you don't want to do, wouldn't you say it's a power? So sin, according to Paul here, what he's calling sin is this carnal nature, which is a power inside of you that forces you to do what you don't want to do. Because if your mind wants to go right and the thing forces you to go left, it's stronger than you. So this is what Paul is calling sin.
Well, that have to be an inborn thing rather than a learned phenomenon.
Yes, definitely.
So it has to do with who you are.
Definitely. But it's half of you. Because the other half want to do the right thing. So it's a half of you. It's not the full part of you. It's the part that is called the flesh. It's the part that Paul says, no, it is dead. That's what we read in verse 6, right? So, with this in mind, let's go back up to verse 5 as we continue to examine this. It's Romans 7, but we're going back down to verse 5 now. So it says... Yes, sister.
I was going to ask earlier, talk about the letter versus spirit.
Right.
So I was going to ask, isn't there a degree of spirit to the letter? Based on what you just said.
It's based on the spirit, but there's no spirit in it. Paul says in Galatians 3, the law is not of faith. He says, we are delivered from the law that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. So you can't make them overlap. Anywhere you find spirit, it's the spirit of the law. It's not the letter of the law. In other words, what you're asking is if what Moses gave on Mount Sinai, if it didn't have any element of the spirit attached to it. Now, people could have looked at it and understood the spirit behind it. But in the letter, what is written itself, the spirit is not there. Letter is letter. But the spirit is the underlying principle. You have to go behind the letter to find the spirit. So that's the point.
Well, I see no problem with the Sabbath because if the Sabbath wasn't told, how would you know to choose to honor that day?
Unless you don't read the Bible.
No. But there wasn't no command.
You don't need a command to do what is right.
No, but I mean, so therefore, there's a lot of things you need to do then.
Like, for example?
Well, I mean, the Bible said if you're going out on a missionary journey, don't take anything. Don't take a purse, money, a second change or whatever.
But again, that is a letter.
Well,
take the spirit behind the statement.
Well, and if you're going out, I mean, it says you go by 2 by 2, that's in letter 2.
Let me ask you something. Right. I shouldn't ask you, but I'm going to put you on the spot. How many times a day you pray?
Sometimes 2, sometimes 1.
Where's the rule?
Not really necessary.
Why you do it?
It's a need.
Okay, you don't need a rule.
Well, I need to be guided in plenty of things.
Fine.
Right.
But you don't need a rule to tell you that you must pray once or twice a day.
Alright, why do we come from sunset to sunset?
Well,
Because I couldn't go to my work coming with 12 o'clock.
No, that's a different question.
Why?
That's a different question. Now the question is, God blessed something. And God set it aside for a holy purpose. Right? Right?
Yeah, but you want to tell us that.
No, but the Bible tells that it is set aside for a holy purpose.
Right, but you want to we show the purpose.
Right, fine.
Yeah.
However, here are the two things we see about the Bible. The Bible says God, about the Sabbath, the Bible says God blessed the seventh day. That means he has imparted some special benefit to the day. Second, God sanctified the day, meaning he has set it aside for a holy purpose. Now, it's either he set it aside for himself or for us. Now, to say that God set aside a day for himself is kind of ridiculous. So we reading with understanding must understand that it is for us. So, the only thing we have to ask ourselves is, if God set aside a day for a holy purpose, how am I supposed to use that day?
Well, he never started dictate to us.
No.
How?
Because dictating is for servants.
No, I mean, it's guidance. And because we said from 6 to 6, or from sunset to sunset, this is how I rule, but that is rule.
From sunset to sunset is the letter. Right? It's the letter.
So how this
The letter also says don't kindle any fire on the Sabbath day. The letter also says that if you catch a man picking up sticks on the Sabbath, you must stone him to death. Right? All of these things. So that letter no longer is what dictates to us, because we look at the principle. And I mean, I could use the example because we have used it before.
So basically, you would have a problem with those folks in America or in Canada who for church have the
I wouldn't have a problem.
You'd have a problem with those.
If they believe that by going to work half day, they are setting the day aside for a holy purpose, then they'll be justified in doing it. But I could never agree with them in that.
Okay.
Because that is not a holy purpose.
Okay.
If that is a holy purpose, then that means that the Sabbath is not different from any other day. So, there are this is an argument that I hear people who give up the Sabbath, they use that argument and say there's no command to keep the Sabbath. But those who are led by the Spirit, you should remember, they don't operate by commands. They operate by the new nature.
That's right.
So if we are waiting for a command to tell us to keep the Sabbath, then we need to go back under the law. We need to go back to the letter. In the Spirit, we operate on the principles behind the law. We operate by the new nature. Anyway, let's go back to this verse 5. Romans 7 verse 5. Now what we are looking at is the motions of sin which were by the law. Alright? So what this is saying is that the law itself stirs up sin. Now we say that if you think sin is breaking the law, the verse doesn't make sense. How can a rule that says, thou shalt not kill, make you kill? The rule cannot make you kill, can it? It's trying to prevent you from killing. How can a rule that says, thou shalt not bear false witness, make you tell lies? No, it is against you telling lies. So, if Paul says, the motions of sin which were by the law, if he says the law caused the motions of sin, and he's talking about breaking the law, transgressing, it doesn't make sense. But if he's talking about it stirs up the carnal nature, then he's right. I'm going to explain. All right? All of us, as Brother Bill says, are born with this carnal nature. Agreed?
Yes.
All right, we're born with a carnal nature. You know that even after I become a Christian, for about 30 years, I never could come to grips with this idea about a carnal nature. It never really hit me. The truth of it never really reached me. You know that? I didn't realize it was there. You know, the first thing I did when I set out to be a Christian, I set out to be good and to do good. And I thought I could do it. So, what didn't I know? I did not know there is a master inside. And what is his name? Sin. Sin with a capital S, right? There's a master inside Although it's a carnal, it's a person who is not yet in the spirit. But there's this carnal master inside, and his name is sin. Now Paul says, this man began to work. He began to activate himself. He began to move into motion because of the law. How did that happen? Brother Bill, me and sin were walking hand in hand. And I didn't know that he was there.
You were a sin.
Well, half of me. Because remember, the carnal nature is only a half of you, you know. Remember that the Bible, the verses that go before says you are married to this husband, right?
No, so the natural men are the man who experienced
The natural man.
So half of him good and half of him evil.
Half of him, no, not that half of him is good. Half of him has a conscience. It's his conscience. Okay. The other half is the flesh. The conscience in the carnal man still wants to do what is right.
Genesis 3:15. God placed something in man.
Right. So you and sin, remember that before you meet the law, your conscience doesn't bother you. You and the sinful master are walking in perfect harmony. One day you buck up the law. And the law says, thou shalt not steal. Up to this point, you've been thieving all your life and you have no problem, right? Now you buck up the law and the law said, thou shalt not steal. You say, okay, I'm going to stop stealing. What happened? Now sin going to show you who is the boss. Now sin is going to show you who is the boss. You buck up the law one day and the law says, thou shalt not commit adultery. And use that one because that one is more understandable, easier to deal with. So, now sin is going to show you who is the boss. Okay? So sin begins to move in you now. And it is because of the law why it happens, right? If you never buck up the law, you and sin would be in perfect peace and you would never recognize that the rascal is there. So the law, when you meet the law, Paul says, I was alive without the law once. But what? When the commandment came, sin came to life. And I died. So it's not that sin was not there lurking in the background, but he wasn't showing up himself. But until you met the law and you started to try to go against the sin nature, then the sin nature shows up itself.
In terms of you're not feeling comfortable or you start to resist.
You start to resist and completely dominate your life. You want to go right and him send you left. And you can't help it.
So it's not a matter of it's a sense of guiltiness. I mean, take over your being.
No, it's a sense of helplessness. It's a sense of the inability. Have you ever gone before God and said, God help me, I can't help myself? Have you ever gone in that condition? Because sin have you buttering like a straw in the wind and you cannot help yourself. Then it is that you recognize. And why are you feeling this way? Because the law is speaking to you and sin is pulling you in the other direction. But if you never met the law, you wouldn't have the problem. That's what Paul is really trying to say. So, yes, sister. Yes, when you meet the law, your conscience comes alive. But the living conscience still is not enough to save you. You must go from meeting your conscience to meeting Christ. Because the law activates your conscience, but Christ activates your strength. He gives you strength. So, this is why Paul says, now we are delivered from the law. All right? Verse 6, we are delivered from the law. In other words, the battering that the law was giving me, the conflict I had because of the law, it is over. Why? Because the thing that was my problem is dead. The thing is the carnal mind, the master inside, the breaking of the carnal nature is dead. So now, praise God. I no longer have to deal with the letter of the law. Because now I'm walking in the spirit of the law. Instead of me responding to rules, what God did was he came and changed my nature. So that now, I don't need the letter of the law to tell me don't do this, don't do that. I don't even need to deal with that at all. Look at what it says in Galatians 5. I'm going to read verse 18. All right. Now, somebody read this for me. All of you read that for me. Galatians 5 verse 18. But, all right. Now, when he says, you're not under the law, what specifically is he focusing on? That's true, but you came in late, so you don't quite get the point I'm making. All right? But let me hear what the others say. Is only Sister Jill catch it? You're not you're not under the letter of the law. Remember, that's our subject, the letter versus the spirit, right? If you are led by the Spirit, and so the Spirit here has to be talking about the Spirit of God, but it also produces the what of the law? The Spirit of the law. You are also walking in the Spirit of the law. Therefore, you are not under the letter of the law. All right? Now, we might say the letter of the law is what? Is judicial law or legal law. And the Spirit of the law is what? Natural law. It's a law of nature. Okay? The law of nature is always much greater than the legal law. Easy to understand, girl. Because it is a law of nature. Gravity. We used that example already, but I wanted to use something. It's a law of nature that the strangest thing. A sheep doesn't resist. I've seen it in Australia. I see them when they're shearing sheep. They treat them like bags of potatoes. Right? They grab them, put them between the legs, fling them on the ground. They put on the shear, and when they finish, they cut the sheep cut all over. He doesn't make a sound. He doesn't fight, he doesn't resist. If you're going to cut its throat, he doesn't resist. Try it with a puss. Thank you. Thank you. So nature, the law of nature is much more powerful than a legal law. If you tell a sheep that he must resist, he won't, because it's against his nature. If you tell a puss to keep quiet, I had a dog that was like that, and one day screwworms got into his head, and I was trying to hold the dog to spray him. I had the hardest time. Me alone couldn't hold him. And no matter what I told him, keep quiet, keep still, keep quiet. Dog, it wouldn't make any difference to a dog that was fairly obedient, you know. And it just illustrates the point that the law of nature is stronger than a legal law. So, the legal aspect of the moral law, the letter, cannot fulfill the will of God. It can only control the sinner for a little bit. The only solution is that the sinner must change to become a spiritual person. That's the only solution, and that's what Paul is saying. We are delivered from the letter of the law so that we serve in newness of spirit. It's not just a change in how we deal with the law. It's a change in our very nature. So Paul says if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. You don't need the letter because you are on a higher level, right? And he goes on to show...
One is transformed, one is conformed.
Thank you, Brother Bill. Now he goes on to show us the difference in the verses that follow. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envying, murder, drunkenness, revellings, and such like. Are these based on legal law or natural law? Let me ask the question again. Do they do them because of legal law or natural law? Natural law. Which rules say you must commit murder? Or which rule says you must hate or have variance or commit adultery or be lascivious? There's no legal rule. It's a law of nature. It's your nature tell you to do it, right? It's the way you are. It's the carnal mind that is telling you to do these things. So Paul is talking about a natural law. And then he says, But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Which is that? Legal or natural law? Natural law again. So you have two natural law, right? You have the natural law of the carnal nature. And how do you try to control that? By the letter, you try to control it by legal law. Alright? So a carnal person, you put him under legal law. Like the curfew, the place, and they send in what kind of squad, what they call him, Zozo, what they call it? They send in different squad to control them by legal law. Because their nature cannot be controlled naturally. But God works to change that natural nature by putting another natural law in place. And that natural law is the law of the new creation. So it says the fruit of the Spirit. When you are led by the Spirit, you produce the spirit of the law, which is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. And he begins by saying, against such there is no law. And what kind of law is he meaning? No legal law. You don't need a legal law to tell you to love, to make you love. You don't need a legal law to bring you joy, peace, long-suffering. These are the fruits that come from the Spirit, Sister Farmer. And so he ends by saying, and they that are Christ have done what? Crucify the flesh with affections and lusts. And so he says, if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. That's the bottom line. All right? You live in the Spirit, you have been delivered from the flesh. Why do you still want to go back to the way of the flesh? Then you go back under the law. All right. Now, as I said earlier on, well, thank you all for your participation. We're going to break at this point.
Is it possible to exercise some and not all?
The fruit of the Spirit? Mm-hmm. It's possible to conform to some. Okay. But I don't think you can be partly spiritual and partly carnal.